Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Refinitiv and the International Chamber of Commerce, Qatar, I would like to welcome you to this webinar titled Qatar, Resilient and Resurgent, Oil and Gas Overview. Qatar has the third largest natural gas reserve globally and is currently the largest supplier of LNG in the world. As we look forward beyond the global COVID-19 pandemic, let's take a close look at Qatar's demand for oil production and exports as we see a reduction in fuel pricing for the region. Today, we will be joined by a panel of experts who will discuss in length Qatar's oil and gas industry, engaging in discussions on the economy, how the blockade has changed its foreign trade dynamics, the emergence of alternative and cleaner sources of energy, and the impact of COVID-19 on the energy sector. So our distinguished panel includes people with diverse backgrounds of experience and also representing diverse geographical regions. We have people from Europe and the Middle East today, and let's hope that internet connections remain good for the duration of this panel. So we'll have Abhishek Kumar and Sudarshan Sarathi, both from Refinitiv's oil market research of the Middle East and North Africa region. We have Ankat Breivik, Director of Refinitiv's LNG research. With us are also Howard Bevan, Head of Energy at Al Attiyah Foundation, and Hatem El Safti, Partner at Mazars. My name is Christine Petrosian. I work at the International Energy Agency at the Oil Industry and Markets Division. Usually I go to conferences and present and answer questions. Today I've been offered the role that has turned the table for me to moderate the panel, and I'm very grateful to Refinitiv and ICC for this interesting opportunity. So let's start. Just before we go ahead, some housekeeping rules. You can submit your questions via the questions and answers box in this little platform. You can do it throughout the webinar, and we'll pick them up at the end of the session. It's pretty easy to navigate if you look at the bottom of the webinar screen to access various resources such as speaker bios, the webinar materials. You can ask technical questions to the staff that is available to answer them. And there is a survey to capture your thoughts and views on the discussion. So let's start with our first session with Ankat Breivik presenting reports on Qatar LNG overview. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christine, and good morning, everyone. And in the global energy market, Qatar is famous for its predominant role within the LNG space. And it has been the top producer now for 1.5 decades. And if we take a little look at this graph here, we see that Qatar was also ranking on top last year, representing 22% of total LNG supplied across the world. But if we look at capacity as such, Australia has in fact come to the #1 place following last year's expansions. And in terms of export, they may soon surpass Qatar. But Qatar will soon regain the throne. And in February this year, Qatar Petroleum took FID on the North Field expansion phase 1 to increase capacity from 77.5 million tons to 110 million tons per annum. And this is just enormous. And additional, they have a phase 2, and they may expand capacity to 126 million tons per year. So we just have to say congratulations. This is just great. And it looks like here that the timing has been really good. And Qatar should be in a good position here to succeed. But as always, where there are opportunities, there may also be challenges. And now let's take a little look at Qatar Petroleum's client base. And here I've listed some of the main importers, and about 70% of the LNG goes to importers in Asia. And a major share here is sold on long-term contracts, which are predominantly oil index. That's Qatar's preference, though. But they're also active in the spot market or short-term market, and that's why I have included Northwest Europe here. You see to the right-hand. That's quite important because Qatar has lots of regasification capacity. They can just take in cargoes, regasify them, send that straight onto the hubs in Europe. And they also have flexible supply contracts with different counterparties across Northwest Europe. And this is a very important part of their diversification strategy. Now, back to Asia, where Qatar has a very strong foothold. And there is a significant growth potential going forward on LNG imports, both to China, India, and also other countries in South and Southeast Asia. And as the energy transition is gaining momentum, government are setting out ambitious plans to increase the share of renewables and cleaner burning fuels in the energy mix. Cleaner burning fuels, and we are most of us reading gas or LNG, and this points to a higher uptake or growing uptake in the years to come. But as always, as I mentioned, where there are opportunities, there are also challenges, and we also know that several of these importers are quite price sensitive. They need affordable LNG, and that could mean pressure on the margins. But as of lately, we have seen that it looks like Qatar is ready to offer some very attractive contracts. RAF, the latest contract with Sinopec, and also with Pakistan with a relatively low slope here. Another interesting thing here when it comes to energy transition is that over the last months, we have seen an increasing number of cargoes, LNG cargoes, being so-called carbon neutral. I mean, the emissions related to the upstream liquefaction could also be transportation, has been backed by VERs that has been cancelled, of course. And this is signaling that LNG buyers and importers are becoming increasingly environmental conscious. And with regard to Qatar, they have ambitious plans to further reduce their emissions, both on the upstream side, the LNG facilities, but also accelerate deployment of CCS. And that, as such, can be very important if they would like to join the club of blue hydrogen producers. Could be something for the future, definitely. As I mentioned, I think that the timing or the FID was rather good. And I try to explain where I come from when saying that. And what you're seeing here is some prices. And the most important I would like to draw your attention to is the red line, which is the Northeast Asian spot price, and the turquoise one, or the Brent index, with here in this example, 13% slope. And as we see here, from the autumn 2018 up to the autumn, late autumn 2020, it's almost 2 years. We see that the Asian spot price has been trading below the price of the Brent indexed. Far less expensive. And during this time, buyers have been advocating for more spot procurement in their portfolio and not that keen on long-term oil index contracts, of course. And also they've been pointing to their wish to have Asian spot price indexations in their long-term contracts. But then, what's happened? You see here, the peak here, last winter. And the market, the spot price, reached record highs. It was triggered by freezing temperatures across Northeast Asia, skyrocketing charter rates, and also some congestion problems in the Panama Canal. And we saw some cargoes changing hands above $30 per MMBTU. And on this backdrop, it may be time for some of the importers to reassess the value of long or medium-term contracts and also their preferences for indexations. So I think that will soon be knocking on suppliers' door. And another interesting thing we saw at the start of 2020, there were numerous new projects racing to take FID, and in 2019 there were around 70-80 million tons being sanctioned. But as price developments just pointed to very low spot prices and uncertainty was mounting, there wasn't much interest among buyers to sign up for contracts so they could back their FIDs. So it has been relatively silent last year. It was just a small little project in Mexico that was sanctioned. But then, first out, Qatar Petroleum with their mega expansion. And to what extent this may crowd out other projects, particularly greenfield projects in the US, that's left to be seen. Regarding the interest of importers to sign up for new contracts, they may be more eager in the next years to come. And take a little look at this chart here. In this graph, I have portrayed the historical and projected LNG supply by region. This is not capacity. This is exports as such. And after a prolonged period with massive supply increase, we see here at the beginning or to the left-hand side here in the slide, it's now going to slow down significantly. And during this time frame here, demand will likely be able to eat into the surplus, gradually tighten the market balance and lift the spot prices and most likely support the willingness of importers to sign up for term contracts. And this will be crucial for Qatar, is not only to back the new expansion with new contracts, but also some of the existing contracts will expire. And also Qatar Petroleum has a large share in the Golden Pass project in the US. But with estimated long-term break-even cost of $4 to bring LNG to Asia, Qatar Petroleum is the world's most competitive exporters. So for Qatar Petroleum, it's more a matter of willingness to compete than being able to do so. So that ends my little overview here on the short-term outlook for Qatar Petroleum and the LNG business. So I think I'll hand over to Christine.
Thank you, Ankat. Certainly a very revealing presentation for me, coming from the oil markets and trying to see the similarities and differences between oil and LNG. Wow. So LNG markets are really quite much more concentrated than oil markets, with Qatar and soon Australia accounting for almost a quarter each of the capacity, right? That's something that doesn't exist in oil. And also the seasonal spikes, they definitely beat oil prices in terms of volatility. That's very interesting. Very interesting to see the implications of these, of the developments of LNG prices over the last 2 years for the buyers, the dilemma that they represent, spot versus long term, and how that changes with just one cold snap in a major consuming and importing region. The issues that you raised about producers and consumers getting more conscious of carbon neutrality and how the producers try to start addressing this with the CCS and some other mechanism. Also, I think we will hear a lot more in the coming years. So thanks a lot for this very comprehensive overview and a very educational one as well. Let's now move on to our next item of the session. I think we should be starting with our polling questions now. So do you think that Qatar's do you see that Qatar showed economic resilience during the recent blockade? This is a question to the audience. Please pick a simple yes or no in your polling tools. And soon we will see the results. Wow, that's very interesting, 100%. 100% yes. I guess also because the blockade was followed by a pandemic that made life difficult for a lot of other regions as well. So it was a combination of impacts that the country had to face, and it seems that the audience thinks that it passed the test with flying colors. Very interesting. So let's move on to discuss this particular question in a bit more detail with two experts, Howard Bevan from Alatia Foundation and Timur Safti from Mazars. Howard,
do you want me to start here, or Robert? It's okay.
Yes, I think, though, was I not going to look at long-term trends first?
Yes, let's Kat touched briefly on the next 6-7 years in her forecast slide, but let's move on further beyond that to I think we can go a couple of decades more, right, Howard? And then come back to our very recent issues of. Okay.
Yeah. I see that Anne's slide stopped at 2027, I pick up the context after 2027. First, I should say that the opinions are my own rather than any official policy from Alatia Foundation. So that's the disclaimer. It is always about supply and demand. In the short term, of course, and showed that we have a relatively fixed supply. You cannot suddenly put a new power station up of whatever sort. In the longer term, we have more elasticity of supply. You have choice. And what is happening after 2027, is happening now, but it'll happen after 2027, is that because climate change is driving technical change, we're going to see some things in the longer term which are more difficult to predict. Supply, as I said, is going to become more elastic. So just a few sort of straws in the air about this. Gas demand, of course, will continue rising for a while, driven by population drivers and the ability of LNG to expand where pipelines cannot go, use of floating regas terminals. Apart from that, we will see almost inevitably gas demand picking up from coal, from generators switching out of coal. Carbon capture will not save coal because it will become inevitable for gas as well. But we see that competition from wind and solar, and I suspect nuclear as well, will come in. So margins for gas and for LNG will inevitably tighten. Gone will be the days when we would, as Anne said, land LNG in Asia at a cost of $4 million BTU and sell it for 15, 16, 17, 18. The idea that supernormal rentier profits for gas, and I guess for oil as well, will exist is gone, because there are wind farms going to be all over the world, there are going to be solar plants, there are going to be nuclear. So profits will inevitably tighten. I use the phrase, Qatar is price competitive. It will be now with the new plants and the economies of scale. It will always be price competitive. I use the term often, Qatar will be the last man standing. But margins, of course, are tighter. And we have a few other things coming in. Hydrogen as a clean fuel. Now, hydrogen is quite interesting for Qatar because, of course, we produce hydrogen and we produce ammonia and methanol, which in a certain ways we already do it, in a certain ways are ways of transporting hydrogen easily. So these technologies are already here. In the longer term, I see that climate change is going to affect everything. And as we get more hurricanes and floods and fires and droughts, political pressure will drive climate change more strongly than it has now. So to sum up, in the longer term for gas and for Qatar particularly and for LNG, some ongoing strength but tighter margins is where I see, and a giant opportunity for hydrogen. Thank you.
Indeed, Howard, the hydrogen is very topical today and will stay topical for the next few decades as it inspires the policymakers, first of all, as a very clean energy source. So in that, with this interesting overview of Qatar's potential role in the evolving energy markets in the future, your view that gas is still going to be resilient as a substitute, as a cleaner substitute for coal, that CCS is probably not going to save the coal, so to speak. So that, of course, gives a lot of food for thought. Let's ask the audience what they think about Qatar's resilience now in the future in terms of Qatar's possibility to take care, to stand in the future energy markets. So we either we discuss with Hatem first of his views on the recent issues surrounding the Qatar oil and gas industry and exports in principle, how it affected the resilience of the industry itself and the implications. Hatem?
Thank you. I'm here. Thank you, guys, and thanks for the very important question and for the invite to this by Refinitiv and the International Chamber of Commerce to have the opportunity to speak here. Resilience is a science. Resilience is not luck or chance. From my point of view as risk assurance advisory services here in Mazars, we do provide business continuity consultation, risk management services to a lot of the oil and gas companies here. Without seeing the answers of the audience here today about how did they think the level of resilience of Qatar facing the political turmoil that happened over the last 3 to 4 years. From my own experience, talking to a lot of oil and gas companies and advising them on developing their own business continuity management system and developing their own resilience. Qatar has been prepared for this for decades. And I'm not talking like overall economic factors. No, I'm talking even at the company levels, at the small sister companies of Qatar Petroleum, at Qatar Petroleum, which is a major company here, of course, the national oil provider. The direction from the government, Qatar Petroleum, to all of the Qatar Petroleum sister companies, not to mention I was working in Qatar Gas myself, Qatar Gas and Rosgas now merged. But like all of the companies that is responsible in somehow in the petrochemicals, into the hydrocarbon measurements here in Qatar, have been developing and working on their business continuity management system, has been working on their resilience, have been developing plans and preparing for it way before the disasters happens, way before the incident happens, have been identifying what's the critical services, what's the critical business activities, and what is our strategy to respond. So there is no wonder that people have seen the results of that. There is no wonder that the results of the survey is 100% believing that Qatar have been resilient to the turmoil. And it hasn't been by chance. Absolutely not. It's been following a structured methodological process in developing business continuity management systems and developing this resilience on both strategical and operational level. If we talk at the major strategical Qatari level, the most important impact of the political blockade at the beginning was food security. There was no real impact on individuals here. Food security was secured. Considering the huge risk of suddenly blocking the main road to the country, there was alternatives. There was risk management in place. There was identification of such risk. I am 100% sure that the decision maker in Qatar, top level, which to be honest, I'm not saying that I'm talking to them or advising them or knowing, but I've seen the impact. I know that the decision maker here in Qatar have planned for this, have built plans to food security before the date of the blockade. And there was alternatives. There was alternative routes. There was internally development. Very simple thing. Qatar has been investing not in oil and gas, but investing in a huge mega projects for water reservoirs to secure water. Okay, this is long-term thinking. This is resilience in the building. You need to prepare for your resilience. It's not a chance. It's not a coincidence. And from what I've seen from my own perspective as a consultant for a lot of oil and gas companies here in Qatar, they are investing in their business continuity plans. They are investing in the risk management activities. They are developing and testing their plans in case of such disasters, and this is why resilience has been seen by individuals who have answered to your survey. Resilience can take country or a company from disaster to even outperforming. What happened is Qatar has outperformed the regional areas in oil and gas production. I have a very interesting fact I want to share here. As soon as the blockade happened, a lot of commodity traders globally who are looking at the future prices of hydrocarbons thought that this is a huge risk into the security and the supply of oil and gas. Especially that, as many of the presenters talked about, Qatar is the largest LNG producer in the world. So imagine the largest LNG producer in the world is not actually selling or distributing it. What would this make to the prices? It would just really makes it spike. But commodity traders who I am in touch with and going through the researches and going through definitive reports and their pricing reports, just looked at the risk for maybe less than a week. Qatar did not miss one shipment, even one shipment of LNG or hydrocarbon distributions. This is by all means a leadership brilliance. This is by all means a great resilience. And this is why the commodity traders just took them less than 5 days to realize that the blockade has no teeth, is toothless, has no power to impact Qatar.
Howard, do you have any views of these also in the context of longer term issues and developments?
A few things, and I agree totally with what Haytham has said. It was a remarkable display of resilience. Of course, some of the aspects of the blockade were, of course, illegal and treaties were broken, but supply chains did prove to be, or alternative price chains did appear to be quite resilient. I mean, we have a few amusing incidents, you know, the great Diet Pepsi shortage lasted perhaps 2 weeks. Some little comments about the quality of milk. You know, it was all very trivial. The supply chains were good. And a credit to everyone, the leadership, the importers, the shipping reorganized, all great stuff, and really very, very resilient. But the underlying question about this is, what did it really achieve? What did the blockade achieve and what happens if it comes back again? Well, of course, from the point of view of the blockaders, it didn't achieve anything. It was, as Haytham said, somewhat of a toothless gesture. But I believe there are going to be feelings of bitterness from the people that split families, the students who lost their places, the properties in other countries which landlords have undoubtedly lost some rental property out of. So there are going to be some harsh feelings within Qatar. The harsh feelings will make sure that the resilience stays rather than drifts away, I believe. But the other great thing which happened was that because, as Haytham said, the LNG cargoes, the Dolphin pipeline, it was all honored. Means that Qatar's standing in the world as a commercial partner has been enhanced. And I believe this is a great achievement out of the blockade. Okay, that's back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I like. So really, there is a research have been done about organizations or countries that face a huge distress, like what we just seen. Companies that face this distress, the revenue just plumbed down right away. The people who have business continuity, even Qatar, as you just said, let's say Qatar is a country and they face this distress, they face this disaster. There was some issues right away. Milk, Diet Coke, prices going up, people scared. It took the hit. But because there was resilience and plans for alternative routes, for alternative activities, for very strong international relationships that Qatar had with other outside players, they recovered quickly. What happens is when the company or the organization recover from a distress, their revenues and their economical situation actually outweigh the countries or companies that did not face any distress. So I can tell you that now Qatar is stronger and better than if it did not face that. And this is, by the way, a research in numbers. A very true number about research. A company that faces a disaster and recover, people trust in it will increase, their partnership will increase, the people relying on this company will increase. But people who face this and go down and cannot recover actually fade away. So if you want my humble opinion, Qatar is now much stronger in figures, in facts, in actuality about LNG, about economics, about everything from a country that did not face such stress. Very proud of what the Qatar and the Qataris and the people who live here have managed to help the country to achieve in such a hard time.
So very interesting.
Totally agree with you. Stronger. Yeah.
Very interesting that our experts also have 100% yes response to the polling question. So we can conclude the session about the resilience. And I guess, of course, it's not just the blockade, but also the pandemic that later came into the question. So in some ways, I guess the country was a bit more prepared to face these now global issues of supply chain disruptions and so on. So let's move now to our polling question, which actually throws us back to Howard's presentation on the energy transitions in the future. So do you think Qatar will accelerate, will survive in the energy transitions in the coming decades? What's your view of Qatar's role and significance in this period? We will soon move to the results. Of course, it's going to be a difficult time for producers, but our audience thinks, 2/3 of our audience thinks that in general, Qatar is well placed to face the challenges both by the energy transition. Also an interesting result, quite optimistic. And I guess we can also say realistic, given that it's mostly LNG. And the gas role is probably continuing to be as strong as it is now. So let's wrap up our discussion with LNG and gas and other types of fuels and move concretely to oil, where Refinitive's two senior analysts, Abhishek Kumar and Sudarshan, will discuss the recent developments in the oil exports, again, which had the same issues. But before we move to the discussion, we will ask once again for your opinions in our next polling question related to oil, if we can please get the question. So do you think that Qatar's oil exports as well have been resilient to the last few years of the diplomatic crisis and the pandemic of last year, and the one that is continuing, unfortunately, to this day? Of course,
common sense is that absolutely resilient, and they didn't miss one shipment. This was brilliance at its best, not missing one shipment. One of my traders, commodity oil, specifically oil commodity traders, just like, wow, not one shipment. That's impressive.
Yeah, for the pandemic, the issue, I guess, is more about the volume issues, because a lot of producers have cut the exports given the lower demand in the market last year. With concrete evidence of how Qatar.
I think as well, just to put in something extra, is that, of course, the shipments to the UAE through the Dolphin pipeline were totally honored. And it was the separation of commercial agreements from the political stances that brought out Qatar in an even better light.
Yeah, thank you, Howard and Fatem. I think I would like to agree with all of you who have spoken till now. I'm Sudarshan here, and I think I do agree with the audience also that Qatar's energy exports in terms of oil has also been pretty resilient. They have managed to pass through the diplomatic crisis and largely through the pandemic without any effect on them on the downside. They have managed to place their exports pretty successfully. In the interest of time, what I will be doing is just cover shortly what we saw in the oil exports. However, Refinitiv has done a detailed report on the topic of Qatar's resilience. It is available for download through the panel. You can also subscribe to our other research reports through the landing page. We hope you'll find it informative. In terms of the crude oil exports, as you can see from the chart on the left, you will realize that the blue bars represent the crude oil, and they have been relatively stable through the periods of the crisis and dipped only starting from 2020, and that was largely to do with the pandemic. But if you look at the condensate exports, they have held steady even during the period of the pandemic. That was largely to do with Asian demand for petrochemicals being pretty strong. So the crackers in Asia preferred to import a lot of condensate and convert them for petrochemical feedstock, which is something that Abhishek will be covering in his slides. If you also look at the percentage contribution of condensates, they contribute about 30 to 45% of the total oil exports in terms of crude and condensate put together. So that is pretty significant because of most countries, Qatar we already know is the top player in LNG, and condensate from Qatar is also a byproduct of the LNG production. With the North Field expansion, we expect a lot more condensate to come in, and Qatar is expected to become the world's largest condensate exporter, exports from Qatar. So this overall becomes a very important piece in the overall global oil supply to look at the condensate exports from Qatar. If you look at the the chart on the right side, you will realize that the majority of exports head to Asia. And this is something that we saw from Anne's presentation on the LNG also, that Asian buyers kind of dominate the entire exports from Qatar, be it in crude, be it in condensate. One interesting highlight that I want to highlight to bring it out to our participants here is that if you look at the percentage of exports to China, this is very different from what you would notice from most of the other Middle Eastern producers. China generally tends to be one of the largest importers in Asia from Middle East. But with respect to Qatar, most of the volumes tend to go to Japan, and in the case of condensate, they head to South Korea. So there are a lot of Japanese consortiums that have a presence in the upstream space in Qatar, and they tend to get access to equity barrels. Plus also the fact that they've been historically processing these barrels and they find it a good fit for their refining configuration. This is both an opportunity and a risk for Qatar overall. The fact that there is a lot more scope to push volumes to China gives them the flexibility to market there better. The fact that they're exposed to Japan also has its own set of challenges, which I look to cover in a later slide. I'll hand it over to Abhishek to talk about the refined product exports from Qatar. Abhishek?
Sorry, my mic was on mute, sir. Thank you, Sudarshan. As oil product exports from Qatar is concerned, we didn't see any impact due to a diplomatic crisis. As even before the diplomatic crisis, the exposure to Middle East was minimal. And if we talk about the Qatar product trade flows and refining infrastructure landscape in general, if we look at the first chart, naphtha is the largest clean product from Qatar, which is exported, followed by diesel. And the major reason for this is the refining yield of Qatar is geared more towards light and middle distillate products such as naphtha, jet fuel, and diesel. And but the demand for jet fuel is higher domestically, and that's the reason we see lower export numbers for jet fuel over the years. We also see increase in export from 2017 onwards, and the reason for that is addition of Ras Laffan 2 refinery to the existing Ras Laffan 1 refinery, which effectively doubled the condensate refining capacity at Ras Laffan. If we talk about capacities in Qatar, out of 603 KBD, 429 KBD are crude and condensate processing unit, whereas the remaining are GTL processing plants. Even in the 429, CDO capacity is only 80 KBD. And if we talk about the sourcing, the crude is sourced from the Dukham oil field, whereas condensate and natural gas is supplied from the North field. Currently, there are 5 commercial scale GTL plant, and Qatar has been at the forefront of GTL processing and technologies. Out of those 5, 1 each are there in Malaysia, Nigeria, and South Africa, and there are 2 in Qatar. And out of those 2 in Qatar, Pearl GTL facility is the world's largest, and that processes around 55% of the world's total capacity. So as the majority of the feedstock is condensate and natural gas, which is why we see higher naphtha output and export. Talking about the destination for Qatari oil product, if we look at the chart towards right, Asia Pacific takes roughly 70% of the total volume from the Qatar, and the second comes is Europe, and aptly so, because naphtha is the largest exported product from Qatar, and Asia being the key hub for petchem, the total volumes heading to Asia, a majority of them goes to Japan, South Korea, China, and Singapore, as naphtha is used as a feedstock in the crackers. If we talk about Nafta Export, it held steady last year. And not just the export, even the refining margin for naphtha was fared pretty well as compared to other oil products because of the robust demand of plastic in the form of medical supplies, office supplies, or even the packaging material, which created the need for feedstock such as naphtha. And the GTL naphtha, which is produced by the GTL plants in Qatar, they have higher paraffinic content, which is suitable for the cracking unit to produce ethylene, which is further supplied to the polymer industry. In terms of destinations, Europe comes second, which is the reason for that is middle distillate is exported and majorly diesel. And countries like Netherlands, France, and UK takes the majority of the Qatari volume which comes into the region. Even after the lackluster demand, which we saw in Europe for the middle distillate and diesel, this export of diesel from Qatar held steady. And the reason for that is in the second half of last year, Asia Pacific recovered quickly as compared to Europe, and there was a lack of arbitrage opportunity, which led the flows from Middle East towards Asia. And support also came from Africa, as South Africa continued to pull the barrels because of 2 of their major refinery went offline because of a fire incident. Looking at the jet exports, Qatar being the regional aviation hub, it was impacted dearly, and the jet fuel demand fell significantly domestically. And because jet fuel demand was down domestically, there was more barrel to export, and Qatar could do so because in Q2 there was a steep contango structure, and market participants shipped cargo from east toward west of Suez. And because of that higher number of export during the Q2, which basically inflated the overall year number, which otherwise would have been lower. And the reason is because jet fuel comprised roughly 45% of Qatar's domestic oil product demand. So to summarize, yes, Qatar has been resilient through the period of crisis. One of the major reasons is because it didn't have much or minimal exposure to Middle East. And second, about the pandemic, because the naphtha is a major exported product from Qatar, and there was a robust demand for naphtha, it held pretty well. Back to you, Christine.
Yeah, this is very interesting to see the NAFTA figures, because indeed in our work at the International Energy Agency, we noted how petrochemical feedstock demand was resilient last year. NAFTA and LPG demand almost did not decline. compared to 2019, where transport fuels, and especially jet, of course, were really in quite a bad shape. Let's continue discussing the longer-term developments for oil. Back to Sudarshan to see how this will evolve in the coming years.
Maybe I'll continue with the near and medium term.
Yeah, please, Abhishek.
Yeah, thank you. So there are a couple of factors which are going to impact the trade flows dynamic for Qatar or the shipping operation in general for the near and short term. And the first one is vaccine rollout and global recovery. So as the vaccine rollout progresses, there will be a pickup in product demand, and the trade flow dynamics for Qatar is definitely going to change. As of now, Qatar is self-sufficient in all the product except gasoline. But because the motor fuel demand was down last year, the Qatar refining capacity was sufficient enough to cater to that gasoline demand. But as the gradual recovery takes place, gasoline demand will increase, and then Qatar will see the increased import of gasoline into the Qatar. As far as gas oil trade is concerned, we don't see major change in the trade flows as domestic demand. What we see in the last 2 quarters. For Qatar, there was some recovery for gas oil. And if we consider the Q4 sales of diesel fuel domestically, the numbers or the volume was just marginally down as compared to the same period a year prior. Major impact is going to come from jet fuel because domestic demand last year was down roughly 33%. And as more and more flight takes off, jet fuel demand will increase, and with FIFA World Cup in sight and because of the recent agreement, airspace has been opened between Saudi and other countries, which will provide an impetus to the jet fuel demand. But in short term, we don't see jet fuel demand to return to the pre-pandemic level anytime soon. And if we take a conservative approach, it can take anywhere between 1.5 to 2 years to reach anywhere near 2019 level. The other point which is going to impact the shipping operation is with the recent agreement, Qatari flagged and owned vessel now can bunker at Fujairah. So before the restrictions were put in place, around 20% of Fujairah total bunker sale was accounted by the Qatari owned or flagged vessel. And after the restrictions were put in place, those fleet had to find an alternate option, and thus Singapore became the primary hub. So in near term, it is very unlikely to see the peak of 2017 volumes at Fujairah. But if there are significant cost advantage, shippers or vessel owner will definitely like to bunker at Fujairah, and it is a win-win for both being at Qatar or UAE. The last one is refinery capacity addition. In short to medium term, we see 2 major refining coming online. In the region Middle East. One is Jazan in Saudi Arabia, which is more middle distillate focused because half of the production is going to be diesel and the remaining product are going to be used domestically. Jazan will pose major threat to the West Coast refiner of India because it is well placed to supply diesel to the Europe as well as Asia depending on the market dynamics. The second refinery is Al Zour in Kuwait. That is going to bring a surplus amount of fuel across the slate, and Nafta, even after the domestic consumption of Nafta, Al Zour will be able to export Nafta. And Nafta being the major product from Qatar, it is going to compete with the Nafta coming from Al Zour. But we are seeing continuous demand growth for Nafta as a feedstock and cracking as the petchem demand is robust. So Qatar will not find much difficulty in placing the barrel. Even before the COVID, there was some concern of single-use plastic, and government had initiative to ban them or tax them. But in shorter to medium term, it didn't seem to have a significant impact on the plastic demand, and which augurs well with Nafta demand. What Qatar may do is in short term or medium term is to invest more into petchem units so that dependence on Nafta export for the evacuation of Nafta will go down and the Nafta can be consumed domestically. Yeah, thank you. Over to you, Sudarshan.
Thank you very much, Abhishek. So now we've heard views from fundamental analysts, Kat, Howard, Sudarshan. I was wondering if Hatem has any views from his perspective of risk management, corporate governance, to talk about these longer-term issues, not just market supply and demand balances, but also it would be interesting to see what his views are on longer-term issues, challenges and opportunities for the energy industry and particularly for Qatar. Hatem, if you... We can't hear you, Hatem.
Yep, there was a noise around me, so can you repeat this, please? Hello? Can you hear me now?
Yes, I was wondering if you could add your thoughts on the future developments in the energy and industry in general, and particularly in Qatar, on top of what our fundamentals analyst discussed.
Absolutely.
With oil and energy.
Absolutely. Looking at the future of the energy, LNG or gas, methane, CH4, is going to be one of the key sources of clean sources of energy. Yet, there is still major trends into the future into more renewable and more different types of energy. Of course, the LNG is much cleaner than the heavier type of oil, and Qatar and the global market for LNG will still be extremely high. However, there is major trends now into hydrogen energy and into renewable solar, wind. I know that the Qatari government is investing in renewable energy significantly and hydrogen energy significantly. I believe they will be still a major provider of energy globally. Being a desert means that you have a good solar source of energy. Having LNG can help you produce more energy, etc. So my simple view is now Qatar for the next decade or two is going to be secured from energy source provider perspective, because LNG will still remain as a key source of a clean energy. Beyond that, Qatar is investing in another renewable sources of energy to still be a key market player in the energy in general in the future.
Thank you very much, Hatem. So let's now start with the questions from the audience to our experts. I've got a question for Ankat. Ankat, other LNG suppliers which do not have as low break-even providers, as low break-even as Qatar Petroleum, what can they offer to attract clients in this increasing competition in the LNG industry?
Thank you, Christine. It's a good question. There are a variety of contract elements one can consider. And one thing is, of course, price, but flexibility. You can also price flexibility, of course, and I think it's going to be more and more pricey. And it's flexibility on the volume, flexibility on the destination, of course, whether there should be a destination clause or not in the contract. But this volume flex is quite important now. We see more and more of the importers that are competing in the downstream market, gas market. They're liberalizing it. Look at Japan, more competition in China, trying to do that in India. They need to be flexible and not caught too long or not caught too short. So that's something that's going to be very, very important for them. And also to have some shorter contracts, not a very long duration. And also price index. We know that Qatar is very famous for its passion for oil indexed, but you have other kind of indices you can use, and also use hybrids that others can also offer to the clients, of course.
Thank you, Ankat. Hatem, there's one more question for you. How mature is Qatar's oil and gas industry resilience and business continuities compared to regional and international oil and gas companies? I know you talked quite a bit about it already, but now in specific comparison with other peers. Thank you.
Brilliant question. I've worked internationally in major oil and gas companies, and I've seen what the international oil and gas company are doing to develop the resilience. And I've been here for quite some time in Qatar, and I've seen oil and gas companies developing their own resilience and business continuity management systems. And as a personal opinion, I can honestly say the level of maturity here is pretty high and higher than international players in the West world, in Europe and the US. The policies, the procedures to develop business continuity here is really key investment part of the decision makers in all of the oil and gas companies. I'm comfortably saying, if we are comparing the maturity, and we have some data regarding maturity comparing organizations from region, Qatar, global, I'm pretty comfortable saying that the level of maturity here in Qatar is much higher. And my opinion is not as important as seeing the results. Again, I will refer to what I said at the beginning. The results are undoubtedly indicating the strong resilience and the strong processes. It was never a chance to have this resilience and response from the Qatari organization and the Qatari country. So the maturity is pretty high and higher than Western companies developing their own BCMS or business continuity management systems.
Sudhar Singh, there are a couple of questions for you with regards to some of the longer-term developments in oil, specifically the impact of U.S. shale on Qatar oil exports, and also these longer-term demand developments, petrochemicals, refining capacity issues. If you can develop these ones a bit more. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a good and important question to address. One of the points for the longer term to consider would be that with reducing transport fuel demand, more of the complex refiners are likely to move towards a petrochemical maximization mode, which would mean that they would be cracking more of the heavier streams. And what this would probably do is put some sort of a pressure on the demand for condensate from Qatar. And we also see that US has been supplying a bit of condensate to allies South Korea and Japan. It's not been very significant to dent Qatar's share, but there has been some cargoes, and these countries have been sourcing quite a lot of condensate and light crude from the US. A more important factor to be considered would probably be the removal of sanctions on Iran, which would actually result in a lot of condensate flowing. Prior to the sanctions, close to 40% of the condensate bought by South Korea and Japan actually came from Iran. So that is something for Qatar to consider about what was going to happen with respect to the petrochemical industry in the future, and who are the key competitors likely to supply condensate and naphtha or other intermediate streams to make petrochemical products.
Thank you very much. We have a question for Abhishek with regard specifically to the recovery of jet fuel demand. When do you see a full recovery for this particular product? Thank you.
Great question, I would say. As far as jet fuel is concerned, it is the most impacted product due to COVID, as there was significant restriction on air travel. And last year in April, the air passenger traffic dropped to crashed to 94% year on year. And however, as the year progressed, there was some bilateral agreement between the government and travel bubble. So jet fuel demand picked up a bit. But it is not going to reach the pre-pandemic level anytime soon, and it is going to take anywhere close to 2 years. But as long as restrictions are in place, it will hamper the jet fuel demand pickup. And there are behavioral change also, because business travel accounted for roughly 20% of the total air travel demand, and currently most of the meetings are happening online. So those input or those demands to come back, it will take time. So conservative, it can take close to 2 years for jet fuel demand to recover to pre-pandemic level.
Thank you, Abhishek. Howard, I was wondering if you could pick up some of the Q&A questions.
Sure.
In terms of Qatar's role in the future supply of energy, its role in the market, in the international market for energy supplies, how will it evolve, in which direction?
In the long term, of course, this is, as I said, a bit difficult to predict. For LNG, of course, it is a low-cost producer and remains so as long as LNG is being sold. I do feel that the impacts of climate change or the steps to avert carbon dioxide emissions are going to be quite large, but the world will always need energy. Well, if it doesn't need energy, the world is starting to get a very sad place. So the question is, how will this energy be produced? And it's okay, people say, it's all electrification, but electrification is not an energy source, it's a way of transmitting it. So how will Qatar fill its role in future energy markets? Who can say? But they have a huge energy resource in gas and quite substantial other energy resources relating from fuel oil. So Qatar's role, it will do it somehow. Never mind about how. It shows resilience. It'll carry on showing resilience, and it will supply the energy markets in a way which I think is yet totally to be determined.
Thank you very much, Howard. Thank you very much for everyone, the panelists and the audience, for taking part in this webinar. I think we had a very good discussion, both sort of with numbers, facts and figures presented by Ankat, by Sudarshan and Abhishek, and we also had expert views over general energy trends, about the political, corporate governance, risk management issues presented by Hatem. So I think in general it was a very good and balanced discussion. Thank you very much for joining us this morning or this afternoon if you're joining from further east. And I believe there will be a replay available. You will receive emails with regard to the timing of this, and I hope you will have a nice day and a nice week. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much, guys. It's been a pleasure.